Thank you for joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
And you're listening to Diesel Performance Podcast. Today we are joined by special guest Nick Pregnitz. Nick, how the hell are you?
Great, guys. Thanks for having me.
You wouldn't even let us intro you, man. You were like, you were there.
Excited to be back.
Yep, had to jump in. Thought that's what we were doing.
Nick, we've had you on the show, I don't know, a dozen times or so. Obviously, I think everyone knows Chris and I work here for you every day over at Calibrated Power Duramax Tuner. We've asked you all sorts of first questions to have you on the show and kind of kick us off. Chris, what was the question we landed on asking today?
So, the whole topic of today is talking about complexity of ECMs and getting into tuning. And we asked Nick how he's gotten started with diesels, but how did you physically get into tuning? Like, what made you plug into your truck and read the file? Like, what does that look like? Like, how'd you get started doing that?
Well, I was reading CarCraft as a kid, and I kind of kept reading all these things about guys turning screws on carburetors, and then with the Grand Nationals and later model TPI stuff, just the ability to find extra horsepower that wasn't in the parts list. So, they'd say we installed a new intake, Performer RPM intake, and then this is what it made, and then once we jetted it correctly, it picked up another so many horsepower, right? And so similarly on EFI motors, and then, of course, then on diesels. So that, taking that interest in bringing everything together, in putting the polish on something, really finding those, I'll call them those free powers, being able to make modifications, being able to change timing, being able to make small adjustments, as you're driving and finally hone your hot rod is kind of a privilege, I thought, as a youngster, and just kind of kept developing that.
How old were you when you tuned your first vehicle?
I mean, I was definitely tinkering with the timing and the jets and stuff on my car in high school. The first car that I tuned was a LS motor car, so 98 LS1. Yeah, I think I was in my early 20s.
How about the diesel? How about your Duramax?
I want to say maybe 23, 24 when I tuned my first Duramax. Yeah, somewhere around there.
And that was the gold truck?
No, that was a I put an ad on Craigslist and said, I have EFI Live. I use it to tune my Camaro, and if anybody has a Duramax and is interested in being a guinea pig, hit me up.
Well,
and fucking Craigslist Day, somebody actually replied to that and showed up with their new, you're very new.
Yeah.
Their new truck.
Very new truck, and saw a 23, 24-year-old child.
Man-child.
and literally was like, go ahead and plug into my OBD2 port. That's insanity.
So
yeah. It was a new LB7.
So forums then aren't like they are now, right?
Right.
Like we know that.
Right.
Also, the ability to gain stock files back then, you were able to read the base file off of the truck.
Sure, yeah. Any vehicle you tune, you had to read the file off it. Yep.
Walk us through what was that first Craigslist find, right? Like that guy calls you up, says, "Hey, I have this LB7. I want you to tune me up." What did that look like?
Yeah, so he had been running an Edge Juice with Attitude. It was a ZF6 LB7, and he had a stock clutch in it. So I remember he was concerned about the clutch. It was a regular cab 2-wheel drive truck. So it spun the tires mostly. It didn't really hurt the clutch too bad, but had been logging his 0 to 60 times and was like, it heard EFI Live was the way to go. And I think there were a few other guys out there, like Ridge Runner, Kennedy, maybe Bobo, some of those early guys were out there tinkering around. So we just started adding pulse width and started bumping the timing up and just kind of kept creeping up on it, and like, oh, did that sound weird? Was there a weird sound? Oh, the EGTs went over 1350. Yeah, we should probably take it easy. Like, extremely nervous and I didn't have any money to fix this guy's truck if I broke it, so that was a problem, right? If that happened, and I didn't get the impression that he was overly wealthy and could risk blowing up his vehicle. So we were both. I think he knew what he was getting into. He was a younger guy too, was maybe a union job or something, and just was looking for a deal. And I think he was excited to go through the software with me too. Like he had a tuner mentality. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Did you blow it up?
No,
no. Come on.
No, I didn't blow it up. No, we went back and forth. I mean, we were buddies for probably a year after that, going back and forth, trading files, trying different stuff, him kind of giving me feedback on how the truck was running and that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Now, what were the resources that you used in knowing to play with pulse width, knowing to play with timing, because those, in my opinion, those are diesel terminology, type tables that you would play with. At least the pulse width is.
Sure.
So coming from, a gas engine, talking about like, I know like injectors, duty cycles, timing, stuff like that. Like, how did you know to adapt, and those were the tables you needed to play with?
I don't know. I remember looking through the first LB7 file and thinking this makes more sense to me than the LS stuff did at first. And just like, oh, well, if I just pretend that the injectors are bigger, this is how I could make it think that, right? And so if I do that, just thinking of ways I could get more fuel in the combustion chamber. And then what would happen with the boost and how I should maybe tinker with timing. It was a lot of experimentation, to be honest, Chris. There was no book, there was no guide, there was no handbook. I mean, the only thing out there was McRat's 2020 how to tune your vehicle, and I think SoCal might have given you a base file if you bought EFI Live from him, which I hadn't, but maybe a base file might have come across my desk somehow. There wasn't a lot of information, man. I don't know.
Okay. So the Evolution LB7 Gen 1 Duramax, right?
Yeah.
As time's progressed, right? I mean, now you've made a business out of this.
Yeah.
You tune. We play with a lot of ECMs at this company, right?
Sure.
It's not
Yep.
just LB7s.
Of course not.
So what has been some of the challenges, I guess maybe in your early years, as you started to gain support on the different controllers? And then I think the ultimate thing is what's the difference in today's world, right? So Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the LB7. You kind of have to have a grasp of like what things point to what things, so you can kind of understand the evolution a little bit. So the LB7 is set up in a way where you push the pedal position, you push the throttle pedal or the pedal under your foot, right? And that pedal basically tells the ECU, I want more or less power. So what you want, ideally, from a good running engine is predictable and smooth output. If the engine gives the driver what it wants, it's done a great job. If it meets the emission standard, it's done an amazing job, right? So those are like the two big things. So trying to get the truck to smoothly give the driver what it needs. So in LB7, you push the pedal and you push it between 0 and 100%, and depending on how fast the engine is spinning, so RPM, you get a certain fuel rate, and that fuel rate is basically how much fuel is injected per stroke of the engine, and that fuel rate, when mixed properly with air and when injected at the right pressure and the right timing, will produce a certain amount of torque. So that's all implicit in the LB7. Like I tell it the fuel rate, and I'm basically like, I think you should probably land about 300 foot-pounds or 600 foot-pounds or whatever it should be. Like that's kind of, that's what the engineers are working towards, is trying to get that torque to be smooth and consistent. The LBZ is kind of like the next generation of that, like a torque-based ECM. So in the LBZ, you have this next layer of throttle control, which kind of looks like you push the pedal, and instead of in the LB7 where you push the pedal 50% and you get 60 mm3 or 55 mm3 or whatever it is, depending on RPM, on the LBZ you say, I push the pedal 50% and I want 230 foot-pounds. And then that ECM goes back and says, okay, how do I make 230 foot-pounds of torque? And it looks back and it says, okay, I need this much fuel and I need this much air, and I need to understand if the air conditioning's running, and I need to understand if there's any other, if there's maybe cold oil in the system. And so it makes all these little adjustments to try and make sure that the output is consistent to the driver every time, even if there's other stuff going around externally to the vehicle. So basically what you get is this smoother and smoother running engine. Not to mention in the LB7, you have one pilot event. In the LBZ, you have the opportunity for multiple pilot events and post-injection as well to kind of smooth out the ramping of cylinder pressure. So that takes more ECU control. You also have EGR control in the LBZ. You have variable geometry turbocharging, so you're commanding how much boost you want, whereas in the LB7, you're basically saying everything's fine unless you go over this boost amount, or everything's fine unless you're this far under the desired boost amount. Like there's a desired boost in the LB7, but you can't get anything out of it because it's a wastegated turbocharger, right? So it's basically just the ECU doing diagnostics in the LB7 for the boost system. So you can see where these layers, like, they add up really quickly, and like to control all these ancillary systems, it takes a lot more operating system capability, it takes a lot more calibration capability.
What's the first time you as a community, diesel community, was really locked out of an ECM? Because LB7s, it sounds like EFI Live came out shortly after the LB7s did, and you pretty much had access to tuning them off the bat. Like, if you could figure it out, you had access to figure it out. LLYs, was that same thing when LLYs came out, the right away having access?
So I came into the game during the LLY was tunable already scene, and the LBZ had just come out and was just being released basically by EFI Live. So they were saying, EFI Live got into the LBZ very quickly after it came out.
Okay.
Same with the LMM. I would say the LML was probably the first, like, we're locked out situation that I remember. And that was, for several years. I want to say 2 or 3 years. So we basically was stuck taking apart the LML ECU behind the scenes, taking the back cover off and communicating it, in boot mode. So that that just adds a major layer of complexity. And like every time you want to make a change, the ECM has to come out of the truck, the back cover has to come off. So you have this like bastardized ECU in your truck all the time, and you're always wondering like, oh, if I drive in a rainstorm, like, is this the end of it?
That was back in like Union. The shop was in Union,
That was
and
2011, 2012.
yeah, right in there, right?
Yeah. I want to say probably within a year of the LML coming out, we were like, BDM style tuning it, but as far as being able to tune it with EFI Live, it was multiple years. So I mean, to get, I had a good running truck, I just couldn't tune it with EFI Live, and so it's like, how do I scale this? I'm not going to bring ECUs in here and cut them all apart. Like, it just,
that seemed crazy at that time.
Yeah.
Even though most of the business still then was just transitioning from bench flash ECMs to autocals, but like autocals completely changed like the ability to be a remote tuner.
Yeah, definitely changed the ability to be a remote tuner. And like you said, I mean, I started the business, I was tuning ECMs. I remember Ridge Runner was tuning ECMs. The other guys were all tuning LB7 ECMs. So you're basically sending an LB7 ECM and someone's bench flashing it, which is not a big deal because you don't have to take it apart to do that.
Right.
In LML, you would have to take the ECU apart, and the back cover was RTV'd on. So like, you're getting in this situation where you have this like hermetically sealed thing, and you're taking it apart, and you have to RTV it and put it back together.
There's a lot of quality control issues.
Quality
at that
control
point.
issues, yeah. And you've got guys. I mean, these are trucks. What was the LB7? $35,000. By the time the LML is out, like, you're talking $50,000-$60,000 trucks. Denali's, and they're fairly new, and like, I don't want to be put in the position where I've downed somebody's truck because I haven't resealed their ECM correctly. So that was kind of a bit of a sketchy moment. Yeah.
What does that look like? So getting into the newer models, like we'll talk, I guess, L5P, because we talk about...
So getting into the LMLs, how much did emissions change knowing how to tune? Like because that's really when DEF hit. I mean, obviously you've been dealing with EGRs, DPFs a little bit in the LMMs. I don't know how much tuning really changed as far as like, you tune the LMM so much differently than an LBZ. Right? Like,
right.
I don't know how much is there, but I know in the LML, all of a sudden you had this new element with new controls, with new parameters, and new standards to be able to keep up to.
Yeah, the LML was really the first time where it was like, okay, we got to get serious about tuning emissions on trucks. Like, these things aren't going anywhere. It's not leaving. Like, we need to really focus on how to get the truck to run correctly, to behave, to, pass emissions if it needs to, and then to have reasonable regen cycles. So like the pressure was on to learn, and learn as quickly as possible, which meant testing and trying out a lot of different cals and really going the hard way through a lot of iterations and filling the DPF up quickly. A lot of times learning that what you're doing is wrong. That was the big pressure on the LML. A lot of the complexity in these ECUs is based on emissions controls. And so, for all these different emission systems, you have desoot, you have warm-up, you have different modes. So, not only do you have more systems you're controlling, but you're controlling them in different modes. So, like, it's a multiple of, right? Not just you have 5 more systems, but now you have 3 modes for those 5 systems. So you have 15 times the need for controller and capacity. So yeah, that was some really tough years of learning how to get really good control of that ECU and when to mess with it and when not to.
That's interesting too, because I know I remember dealing with like customer service more back then in like those 13, 14 year eras where we had just started getting into LMLs, and I'm thinking back to like the need to send out a revision for a tune on something that's brand new, that has all of this new complexity to it, and then getting into things like, TCM tuning needing an update and things of that nature, where it wasn't just the engine that I remember being things that were new that had to be learned. Can you talk a little bit about TCM tuning? Because an LB7 TCM tuning, God forbid I say this wrong, but I seem to remember telling guys mostly on an LB7, like if you're a stock truck with a stock trans tune, if you're not doing second gear start, like I don't know how much in 2015 you were really going to get out of a TCM tune.
Sure,
like if you didn't need second gear start, what are we doing? And then we got to the LMLs, and I remember it being, not only are there revisions coming out around engine control, but trans controllers had changed quite a bit as well.
Yeah. So on the LB7s, basically the only time we were really tuning transmissions was if the defuel had to come on or off, or if the customer had a larger turbocharger and dramatically changed the operating range of the engine. So that was like the main thing where we tuned the TCM. On the LML, now you have internal pressure control. So we're learning around that, like how to make the trans shift smoother, but also to increase the clutch holding capacity. Changing the shift schedule. So the shift schedule is really tied closely to the throttle position. And anytime you're changing the power curve of the engine or where the power is delivered on the throttle, that changes the shift points. So those two things tie together really closely. What it comes down to, I think, for you in 13-14 was you saw that I had the LB7 worked out well.
Yeah.
Right? The thing ran. Like, we didn't have issues with LB7 tunes. Nobody called back and was like, I don't like the way this runs.
The policy on troubleshooting was if somebody calls in with an LB7 complaining about the tune, continue to troubleshoot the truck because it's not the tune.
It's not the tune, right? It's on the LML, all of a sudden you were seeing, like, maybe it's the tune. Right?
That never got uttered.
Right, sure. Well, we can look back now 9-10 years later and say, like, okay, yeah, there were some early tunes that maybe weren't perfect.
I mean, you got to think that was like an early, like TCM was just starting to get real popular, A40s, A50s.
Yeah. So we had some situations where, the trucks weren't shifting great, or maybe we didn't have the pressure control set up right. We had trucks that occasionally, the early stuff, remember, had some regen control issues. Like it would regen a little too frequently, especially if the guys were beating on it. I would say we've gotten past that. We're certainly in a position now where we know the LMM stuff runs really well. We know you have to work at it to really like hurt the truck and be stupid with it. When we know mostly it's mechanical issues if the guy's having issues, which is where we want to be, right? We want to have
the R&D process too as well, because I do remember as well of like reaching out to guys on forums or being on Facebook and saying, hey, we're getting started, what customers would like to get involved on getting tested and getting early iterations, or calling dealers and having dealers test it because, hey, we know this guy and we know we're going to get good feedback from him and things like that. And some of the testing and development of how you do it when you're a small business and there was 8 of us or 6 of us or whatever it was. Yeah. And then now where, there's 40 people in the building and how you do it and what the operation is to like fine tune something. Those are just 2 different worlds.
Well, yeah. You're talking about, what you're saying is that we have a lot more money now to spend on R&D, right? Like we have more people, we have more trucks, we have a bigger place, we have...
Not the Craigslist ad.
Not the
two-wheel drive LB7.
I'm not going to test tunes on customers' trucks that I haven't run before. You know what I mean? Like it's not something we do.
It seems crazy today, doesn't it? It's like you look back and you're like, oh my God, that risk of like, that was 10 years ago. You're thinking like, well, I was 10 years younger. Like my assessment of risk and other people's assessment of risk and who would jump in to do something risky like that. It was very different.
It was. I was 24, 25, right? Like you take those risks when you're that age because you got nothing to lose. Like it doesn't seem like it anyway, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm not that age anymore, and go about things a little more calculated.
It is, and as that's come up, I think some of that has clearly been maturity, right? You get older and you start to look at things different. But also some of that's been forced with like learning that through the LML. Then we get to the L5P. And I think we can go back and talk about some of the Cummins stuff as well, because I know the evolution of Cummins ECMs was some what I would call more jagged jumps. They just kind of went from
Nothing to everything.
away. I won't. I'm not going to downplay, because I would never go and tune a Cummins. Right. That is not my skill set by any means. But knowing the people who have learned to tune a Cummins to tuning like a third gen and then jumping into a 2020.
Oh yeah.
Two very different
world.
worlds,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
But what about the L5P? That was a huge splash in the market. I remember the R&D that went on for that and the hype that was around that. I remember the amount of calls that we would get on a daily fucking basis asking if we could tune an L5P yet. Can you talk a little bit about getting into that and what that learning curve looked like?
Yeah, the L5P, we went from a Bosch controller in the LML, Bosch control systems, and you kind of get used to the language and the layout, and just like, you almost have to get the intuition of the Bosch engineer. Like, whoever put this thing together, you kind of start to think like them. And so when the L5P came out and we got access to it, it was a Delphi controller. So, when you look at it, a lot of it looks similar, but then there's also parts of it that are different, and there's logic that's set up a little differently. And so I think we had one major thing we had going for us was our L5P stuff was on lockdown, man. It was running good. We could trust it. We knew it worked. We knew the strategy worked. So it was really just a matter of applying that same strategy to the L5P, which meant finding all those tables, right? Like getting the L5P to perform, making sure we had all the tables, all the torque limiters. We had control the ECU to get full power. So like when you go through tuning, the first thing we're going to try and do is make all the power, right? Like we need to hit the horsepower number. And then we're going to come back and say, okay, how do we do it reliably, and how do we make sure drivability is great? So that was the first thing we did in the L5P, was make sure we can get all the fuel out of it, make sure we can get the boost, make sure we can get the target numbers where we need to get them, make sure we're at the limit of the factory hard parts. Like, can we control this thing to get the limit? Okay, yes, finally we've gotten there. And then come back and say, okay, are all the safeties in here that we had on the LML? Does this thing drive as smooth as our LML tunes drive? Well, if not, like, where are those tables? Where are those little guys that maybe those little jagged edges, right? Those little pieces where it's like, it's not supposed to shift like that, or it's not supposed to, take off like that, or that sounds a little rough right there. Any of that stuff, kind of ironing that out backwards. But I would say, the help we had with HBT, they were really eager and willing to listen. Like, hey, we need these tables. We had a lot more accessibility on the back end of the file to like find that stuff than we did when we first started with the LML. So, getting through that's basically what it looked like getting the L5P.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time getting into the newer ECMs where you're like, this strategy can be applied into an older ECM to help refine drivability or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm trying to think of an exact spot where it makes sense. Certainly I've taken, things that I've learned tuning the LML and then the L5P and gone back. We spend so much time on the LML, so much time on the L5P getting it to run right, and then like the understanding in our business is like, oh, our LBZ stuff and our LB7 stuff runs great. Like, why are you going to go back and change it?
Yeah.
I was like, well, I think there's an opportunity to clean up the LBZ stuff a little, like to make the truck clean throughout the whole operating range, to really like be the best.
Does it feel like going back to read something you wrote in high school at that point? Like, you ever gone back and like
why did I do this?
My mom stumbled across like some paper I wrote in high school, and like it's like a one pager, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, what the fuck would I write this? This is like, I would never write this.
Yes.
Or I've even read blogs from 5 years ago where I read it and I'm like, oof, good first swing.
Dude, that's exactly
about
what
it.
it felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is exactly the feeling I had going into it. I mean, and I knew the stuff ran great. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
You look at it and you're like, the things I had to do to kind of like make it all come together, like some of it, not exactly sanitary, like on the top side, looking from the top down. And then it's like, oh, well, I can just take away this like hocus pocus stuff that I had to use, and I can do it the right way here, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
And who knows? Maybe in 10 years from now, I'll look back and be like, there's an even better way. But
Like, man, I was such a hack.
right. Well, I think you have to respect the resources the person has at that time too.
Well, you do. No, there's a reality to what you're saying though, because I drove that stuff and it did run great. But like, however it was done,
Sure.
I don't care, right? Because I'm not a tuner. So to me, I'm like, well, I got in the truck, it ran great, and it was safe.
Yeah.
Sounds like
I have
the rest
truck
of it's
10
your
years
problem.
later,
Like,
and
yeah, like, and we
Yeah.
do. We have them come back where we've talked to guys who have been running our tuning since God knows when, and
Well, and the best is you put the new updated stuff in their truck and they don't like it. And I'm like, why do I even bother? And I know that it's better. I know, like, but people just get in their routine. They like it, and if it lasts 10 years, I mean, who am I to say it's not reliable? Or not as reliable? Like, clearly it works.
what would you say as far as a newcomer coming into this, right? And I think we all here can consider what you do in the tuning lane. You're kind of like a pioneer of, right? You're one of the first and longest lasting guys that are doing this. But from someone who potentially might have gotten started in this 10, 15 years ago to someone who could potentially get started today or tomorrow getting into this, granted, resources are a little different, but you think it's harder or easier for someone to get into it today?
I think there's a lot more resources for someone looking to get into it today. I think as far as growing the business, the marketing side, that was, you talked about the forums, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, social media. I mean, whatever you're doing to get yourself out there, right? It's live by the sword, die by the sword situation is probably my advice. Like, however fast you grow on the platform you're using, that's how fast they can cut you down if they want to, right? So like, you need to understand that. That's an important thing that I would try and put in somebody's head, as they're growing. Controlling your growth, right? Like, just because you can just doesn't mean that you should situation.
I've never known that to be you. I
Sure.
don't know. I don't know.
He's looking through you right now. He's not looking at you.
This is the advice you give your kids based on what you did wrong. Right.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Is that what you're asking for, or what do you want me to say?
No, it's funny you bring that up though, because we've seen this. We don't got to call anybody up. But we've seen guys blow up on just a Facebook group.
Yeah.
Just one guy.
They're that go-to.
They'll jump into that Facebook group. They're super, super helpful. We used to see this on the forums all the time. Somebody jumps in. All of a sudden, they're like, you could just tell they're like, I don't know if they lost their job or they've just lost their mind. And they're like, I'm going to spend all my time. I'm going to be super helpful. I'm going to sell everything super cheap. That's usually like a guaranteed flag on it. And all of a sudden they blow up. And then what happens is generally they blow up to the point that they stop returning phone calls. They stop replying to emails. Their lead time goes from the same day to 3 months. All of a sudden, nobody can get a hold of them. They overwhelm themselves. They burn out and they ghost the world.
Oh, so you mean the same reason they grew is the reason they fell?
That's
Like, come on.
yeah. And it's crazy when you think back to how many times we've seen that flash in the pan come up. How do you avoid it though? Because
so many times.
if you put yourself into something and people are willing to give you money, how do you spot that to say, I need more infrastructure? And I'm assuming usually infrastructure is the answer to be able to handle growth, right?
Infrastructure is the answer. Pricing yourself appropriately is another huge answer, right? Yes, some people aren't going to buy from you, but that's going to pace your business. So I think one of the things that allowed me to avoid that flash in the pan was that I didn't discount my tunes. I didn't discount myself.
Yeah.
I knew that people wanted custom tunes. They wanted a custom experience. They wanted to talk to somebody. So once the business started making money, started paying people to answer the phones, right? And people who weren't idiots. Like, you need people who are enthusiasts, who are smart, who can match wit with the people who are going to be calling in. Because otherwise, I have to talk to everybody. Otherwise, you have to talk to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to talk to everybody, like, you got to pay somebody to do it, or you have to charge an amount that makes you excited to talk to everybody, which is not a small amount, probably, if you're a tuner.
what I used to hear this a lot was if you do it good, don't do it cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something I definitely learned at Duramax Tuner.
Yeah. I think it's probably the thing that saved us from going upside down and
Yeah.
trying to get it as big as possible as a one-man band.
Yeah. Well, there is too. I know, and there's definitely guys out there who want to be small. They want to be. I am a one man band, and I'm going to work just with the people that I like, and that's fine. We've seen a handful of those guys be very successful,
successful.
and very comfortable
I
over
have
time.
some friends who are those guys,
Yeah,
right? Like,
right.
I don't mean to shit on those guys.
No.
I like them.
No, it's not. I think it's a point too. Is I don't know any of those guys to also go and do it cheap. Not any of the ones that are still around, right? Like, I think that's the difference of being the flash in the pan and being sustainable, regardless of what size of a company you want to grow to. If you're going to do it good, don't do it cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense.
I think as the business grows, right, and as things progressed, that gave opportunity to get into other platforms and other ECUs. So you had asked the question about Cummins.
Chris,
5,
you've
9, 6, 7.
tuned Cummins for a handful of years
I did,
when you were here.
yeah.
Tuned your own Cummins.
I did, yeah.
Allegedly. I don't know if I believe it still. What was learning to tune? Did you learn to tune common rails when you came to Calibrated?
I had a 12 valve when I started with this company. Nick would always sit down with me on Fridays. So he, propositioned me to, hey, you want to learn how to tune? I said, yes. He's like, well, then you have to buy a truck, right? I found a truck on Craigslist, nice and cheap, a 2-wheel drive unit, real clean truck. And we would sit down every Friday, and he would explain different tables to me based off of what I understood in the mechanical injection world on a P-pump. This did this did this. And I would play around. I mean, I think my old computer, I had 400 files that I would build just playing with different things and learning and having to, pull off on the side of the road, and the truck didn't want to pull out of the intersection because of something I did. To the end of that truck's life of my ownership, it had a built motor, it had a big fuel system in it. I remember it was like a Tuesday morning, me and Nick were sitting on the dyno running the truck with one of our prototype Stealths, making some pretty cool power. The 590 CM was a lot of fun for someone like myself who was a little bit more simple, and it's hard to learn unless it's hands-on.
Yeah.
Then you get into the 6.7 stuff, and I mean, there's a night and day difference.
Did you know? Because the business had grown at that time, so at one point you were doing like production tunes while doing sales and stuff like that. Yeah. But when 6.7 support came around, because we were quite a bit of latency from what I remember of 6.7s coming out.
When in the era of what I was playing with, it was the third gen 6.7 and the third gen 060759, which it's different, but very simplistic in that ECM for the 6.7. I was not around in tuning the 1012 or the 13 plus.
Yeah.
So that's where I exited the chat, so to speak.
Yeah. No, Chris brings up some really good points. I mean, if you're driving the truck, that's great incentive to make it drive well, right? Like getting stuck in an intersection or having the throttle go dead on your wife is a really good incentive to fix a problem.
Oh, you've had that.
That sounds so specific. Was it the Jeep that she said? Do I remember that correctly? The Jeep, she's like, no more.
We didn't have that one very long.
No. She refused to drive it anymore after that.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, 400 files, right? So you want it to drive as good as possible. You get in it every day, or you get out of it at night, and you're like, there's one little thing that I remember, and you make an adjustment at night, you flash it in, you drive it the next day. And so, every day you're making those iterations, and you're new to the game. Okay, tune the truck that you drive every day. If you're tuning S400 third-gen Rams, drive a third-gen Ram with an S400 on it. You'll get probably pretty good at tuning it.
Yeah.
And then you'll know exactly how all those trucks should run, and you'll be the go-to guy for tuning S400s on Rams. You know what I mean? Like that's my that's advice there.
How about the complexity? Like getting into some of those newer trucks, like get into like the 15 Ram, right? Getting into the 2019 plus 5th gen Ram. Like, have you seen a lot of leaps and bounds as far as ECM architecture, similar to what we've seen in the Duramaxes?
Do you just pull your knowledge from the Duramax and like it's just plug and play to different tables? Like, oh, it's the same tables, they're just for a Cummins instead of for a Duramax.
I would say the Cummins is a lot different than the Bosch and Delphi. The Cummins, it's kind of its own world. I mean, it's similar, in
it's
the way
diesel.
that they're both diesel.
Right.
They both have a pedal lookup table, and they both have a torque table, and they both have a timing table. But how those tables are laid out and how many of them there are and when they're used is different in a Cummins.
Really?
So yeah, the Cummins is it's a different animal. I really like the way Cummins lays their stuff out. I think it's probably one of the I would say it's one of my I like it. Maybe it's not my favorite to tune, but it's predictable. It's done smart and methodical, and it works builds across all generations. Whereas you can tell that GM and Ford, they kind of who can give me the cheapest operating system to get the job done.
Well, that's what I've always kind of wondered is why the others haven't adopted that like kind of business model where Cummins is Cummins. Like the ECM is Cummins, the turbo is Cummins. Like it's not. It doesn't feel matched. It doesn't feel like somebody went through a parts list and was like, pick this and pick that.
Yeah.
Take the blue with the yellow.
GMC and Chevy have one diesel engine. Cummins is a diesel engine maker, right?
Right.
Like their engines are modular. The control system. I mean, a 3.9 liter engine might use the same basic engine control architecture as an 18 liter engine. So like there's a really good incentive for Cummins to like make this thing as simple for their calibration engineers to use and the people internal there to use, so that they can use it across this wide spectrum of engines that they make. And I mean, they're an engine maker, so why not get good at making engine controllers?
That makes sense.
That's a good point.
6.7's got. So the last thing we got into is Power Strokes, which there was a time. I know I have told at least 100 customers we'll never tune a Power Stroke.
Yeah.
And then
we don't like those types.
and then God, I think we first tuned them with Edge, didn't we? Wasn't there some Edge custom tuner that we used for like a month?
Yeah, we first tuned them with Edge Insight CTS
Pro.
Pro.
Yeah.
That's right, because they didn't have enough names. We need to throw one more.
Yeah, they basically
Love you
discontinued
guys.
that product, and I think we were the only ones who
Try to hit it.
tried to hit it. And
Yeah.
that didn't work out so hot. Then on to EasyLink. But I mean, the Ford controller for the 6.7 liter is basically an LML setup.
Damn, how does that feel, Power Stroke fans?
I don't know which one
Just
was
sit
first.
in that. Just
I mean, we've started to offer a lot of support in the Power Stroke stuff. So similar ECMs, right? Similar fuel systems, similar turbochargers on
It's all
some
Bosch,
of the later
man.
stuff.
Yeah, Bosch and Garrett.
As far as the tune strategy goes, similarities, I would assume, since it's all the same parts.
Dude, it's
or
like
similar
the
parts?
same. It's like the same thing.
then why do I get so much more out of a Power Stroke? Because I'll be honest, as much fun as I make fun of Ford's, like I've said it before, the new 6.7 Power Strokes are just really, really hard to beat and bang for buck.
Yeah.
For anybody who gives a shit about
I
performance.
mean, they just move more air and they make more power. Like I don't know what to tell you. And the transmissions are tunable and they get
They're
down.
nice.
So
It's really unique to see, like, you compare a 6.7 Power Stroke to a 6.6 Duramax, and we'll keep it to an LML era, and you think of, like, you look at, like, where the turbocharger is positioned and where, like, the pipes are positioned and all of that. Like, there is definitely something to be said about air in the pathway and how far it needs to travel to utilize that as energy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that has to be something, as far as power potential and what those
you could
capabilities
pitch me
are.
5 theories and I could nod yes to all of them.
Well, either way, it makes more power. So.
I love it. Okay, so now we're up against the next generation of ECMs, and what I hear less about is increasing complexity over the last 2 or 3 iterations here, since 18 or so, and more about ECM security.
Yeah.
How much does that play into the business model? Like, as we look, we're tuning 21 across the board.
21 across the board, yep, on all 3 platforms.
And then 22 into Duramax.
23. We
already got a 23 out.
23 in
Okay.
Max, yeah.
What's changed? Like, why have we seen this shift now? And what do you think that plays out for the future?
Yeah, these manufacturers, you used to have to worry about the manufacturers every time a new tier of emissions came out, because that would be their major release for a new ECU, right?
Right.
Like that was when it was like, oh shit, if they all land on 1 year, like it's going to be a lot of R&D and it's going to be a while before we get into them all. Now it's every other year, there's some incremental security change, and for what reason? You'll have to ask the OEMs that.
I will.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer that for you. All I can tell you is that it makes our lives difficult.
Yeah.
You're not talking to the security code breaking guy. That's not my job, right? I basically am the calibration guy. I make sure that the engine runs well once we have access. So I have to rely on somebody to get through the security for me. And as far as the business model goes, it means that we have to forecast not being able to tune a truck for 2 or 3 years once it comes out, or once a model year comes out, right? And this business is built on being on the cutting edge of technology. We are a leader in that space. We tune the new trucks. I mean, we also tune the old trucks, and we do it damn well, but tuning the new trucks is where the bread and butter is for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I know when we pulled up graphs looking at, hey, where's interest out there? Like the people who say they love us, what type of truck do they have? And the skew towards newer vehicles is crazy. Like you're absolutely right. Yes, we still love the LB7s. Employees still love LB7s here for whatever reason. We still have that old truck kind of DNA, but there's a lot of demand for something brand new, and who's going to be first to it, and what's that going to look like. So I know it's always something that's exciting here whenever we see R&D going on, or we see somebody with a new truck and sitting down in the parking lot, or get snuck onto the dyno or something like that. There's always tons of buzz around the office about so what is it? Who's got it? What are we doing?
There's more excitement, I think, for new platform development than there is for like the excitement 10 years ago of 1,000 horse trucks going on the dyno, or a triple
just
turbo,
another
whatever.
daily.
Yeah,
okay.
now
A whirly
it's
truck, right?
Just another 1,000-horse truck.
Just another 1,000
It's like
truck.
someone's got to drive that 1,000-horse truck.
Yeah.
It's not my turn. It's your turn. You make sure it drives well.
Are you taking the 22 Denali home? I want to take that home.
Yeah. What has cooled seats?
Yeah.
That's the only question I have.
Yes.
I love it.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, I know we talked a lot about tuning today. I think we'll have to have you back on to talk about turbo development and kind of what that looks like here in the future.
Sure.
If you had some parting advice for somebody out there who's maybe gone through your HPA classes, so you can actually learn to tune from Nick via High Performance Academy.
Yep.
So that's a really cool online class you guys can do. But what would you tell somebody who is here saying, hey, I finished your HPA classes, what do I do next?
Drive your truck, tune your truck, get your truck to where you think it runs perfect, immaculate, and find other people who have a similar risk profile to you and start tuning their trucks if that's what you want to do. Right? So if you're a freaking wild card, go on your Instagram, find some other wild card dudes who have trucks just like you, and see if you can convince them to pay you to tune their trucks. Don't start tuning a bunch of people who are 20 years older than you and use that truck to tow an RV. I would not advise that.
That's such a Nick response. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Does it feel like going back to read something you wrote in high school at that point? Like, you ever gone back and why
did I do this?
My mom stumbled across